Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today, whether you're tuning in visually or just audio-wise. Welcome to the Eclipse Evolution podcast. I'm your hostess, Savannah Rose, and I'm so excited to introduce Amanda Byrd today. She's so inspiring, so impressive, and I really just truly believe the conversation that we have today is one that is so relevant and close to my own heart, and one that I will very much find to be interesting too. So all things intimacy, love, relationships, as well as business and moving topics that are taboo, so to speak, into the mainstream, which I think is just so inspiring as well. So Amanda, thank you for joining us today.
I am so happy to be here.
Thank you. And so gosh, when I was reviewing the literature on you that your team sent, you have such a huge, expansive career spanning over 20 years and a variety of platforms and brands. I'm just so curious, how did you get your start in this world, this very niche world of self-care and intimacy? I'm just so curious.
Yeah, I kind of stumbled into it by accident. I actually started with the Hustler Hollywood stores a little over 20 years ago. They opened up a location in downtown San Diego. And for those of you that aren't familiar, the Hustler Hollywood stores were owned by the founder of Hustler, Mr. Larry Flint. They were a collaboration with himself and his daughter, Teresa Flint. And they wanted to take traditional adult bookstores that were kind of grimy and dark windows and coverings, and they wanted to open them up, make them bright and airy, invite couples in to shop for intimacy products. And so they opened their first store on the Sunset Boulevard in 1998. They actually included a coffee shop in that one, so you could come in, you could get a latte, you could read some interesting books, and then you could browse the store. The premise of the whole store was to really help people go in and feel comfortable shopping these items. And they actually had a very large sign right when you walked in, and it said, "Relax, it's just sex." And you could almost see people's shoulders drop, and they were like, "Ah, yes, I can come in here. I can explore my desires, I can explore my wants, and have a good time doing it and not feel shame or that I needed to be, ducking around the corner to go run into a store." So when they opened the store in San Diego, they were actually open until 2 o'clock in the morning. And so I was like, cool, I could go to college during the day and then I could work at night, which is only something you can do when you're 20 years old. But that's immediately what drew me to them. And it just sounded like a ton of fun. And it was. I ended up having a great time there. I became very close with Teresa. I took a lot of retail experience that I had from high school, applied it to the stores, and really started to carve out a name and a space for myself within the Flint organization. So I moved to the UK. I opened up stores there. We opened several more here in the US. So it was really sort of just taking something that I did retail wise, being interested and curious about what they were going to be doing at the Hustler Hollywood store. And then once I got there, I loved the reaction from the customers. And I loved, their ability to be free and exploring something that is very natural to all of us. We are all hardwired for procreation. We are all hardwired for connection, for intimacy. The Hustler Hollywood store had 3 levels in San Diego. And so it started with apparel and merchandise. It got to lingerie. And then the 3rd floor was, of course, all the fun stuff. And so you would have customers, leaning over from the 3rd floor. "Deborah, you got to come see what's on the 3rd floor." And people are just scampering up the stairs. So I stayed in the space. I went over to Penthouse and ran global licensing there. I worked with one of the original campsites before OnlyFans, but similar to an OnlyFans, taking cam models and helping bring them mainstream through art and technology. And then about 2.5 years ago, was contacted by the founder of our parent company for the Fantasy Box. He shared the Fantasy Box with me and said, "We're really looking for someone to come over and bring this to the masses." And I loved what they stood for. I loved that it tied in sort of these decades of experience of the need for intimacy products, the ability to access them in safe, fun, friendly ways. And so I signed on.
Oh my gosh, what a journey. That just sounds like so much fun. It just sounds like fun. And what really struck me was your usage of the word curiosity, because I feel like curiosity is, when we're in that space of curiousness, it, I think, easily removes the shame, because when we're moving from a place of shame or like a lot of us, like I'm in the South, so it might be a little different for y'all out in California, but
Yeah.
the taboo is like another level here. And so
Yes.
for various reasons, but I think like when that shame is present, it restricts communication and therefore restricts intimacy and that freedom like you were describing. So I think when we approach, whether it's intimacy or sex or just sensuality, even our own identity with it, and we come from that place of curiosity, it gives us that natural license for freedom and expression and safety too.
I love that. Yes. And I think that that's really, you know, the challenges that we're seeing right now with couples is, you know, a communication crisis because we are distracted. We're on our phones. We're not talking to each other. Maybe we're even judging based on other things that we're saying. And then that lack of communication then eventually starts to degrade our connection, because communication really starts off that feeling of connection, that intimacy. And so with the fantasy box, it was really exciting because we offer a very layered experience that touches on all of that. And so I was excited to help work on it and bring it out there because I think couples need that. It can be hard to communicate. It can be hard to take that first step. And so having tools that help you open that conversation, I think, are so important.
Absolutely, for sure. And with my background in the more therapeutic space, I was so impressed. Like when I received my fantasy box, I was so impressed at just how it really is this catalyst for an experience, because just from the outward design, I'm like, whoa, this is sexy. Even the box is like, I love it. And then like I was just so moved at just how intentional it felt, and like the questions when I was peeping through. My partner and I are going to open ours this weekend, but I was just peeping through just the questionnaire that came with our set, and just seeing the parallel, I can tell how much thought and love went into the creation, because so a lot of the questions that were in the quizzes are things that like I will ask couples in our sessions, like to build that intimacy and to build those communication skills, just to see like this product that's so accessible contain such rich information. It just really, it blew me away, and I had to get behind it. I'm like, this is so exciting.
I love that, and that means so much, and you had so many good little nuggets in there. But yeah, just to kind of share, so what we do, we start off all of our boxes with what we call our sexy survey. So there's 2 of these, and you ask your partner questions. How long do you like foreplay to last? What is your favorite way to get in the mood? And what we found is that a lot of couples have actually never talked about these things. You know, they've sort of moved into relationships and they kind of have their default way of intimacy and moving into that space. So they haven't really chatted about it. And this, even a lot of couples say they don't even get past the sexy survey. They're like, that was enough to just talk about things and to get to know my partner in a way that I didn't before. That, you know, starts to lead to all of a sudden that connection and that shared intimate moment.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you touched on something a second ago with just this day and age that we're living in, how there's so much distraction and there's so many barriers to true intimacy. I think, I wonder if it's also a uniquely American thing, because I've seen in other cultures, like if, let's say the lawnmower breaks, they'll take time to fix it. Whereas I feel like in American culture, something breaks, or even if just the new model comes out, it's so impulsively enticing, where I see that almost show up, that consumerism show up in relationships too. Like when there's a problem, couples don't like know how to fix it because like maybe they didn't build those communication skills. And I think that when you're able to build those skills in a playful way, it makes it so much easier to integrate that into those moments that are challenging, like maybe moments of conflict or disconnect. But all that to say, I'm just curious, like what your perspective is and what you've noticed on like those challenges that can cause a dissonance between partners, whether it's technology or just, like you said, like the comparison piece, perhaps. I'm just curious what you've noticed.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of that comes into play. And I also think the other thing you said too, which is so important, is just play, you know, having fun with your partner instead of looking at intimacy as checking the box. Okay, good, I got it done. We can move on now. Looking at it as an opportunity for having fun, for having some playful moments. You know, something fun about the fantasy box is, you know, we've got fantasies that, you know, are sort of more traditional, like a naughty nurse or a French maid, if you want to dress up and just assume an entire new character. Or we have some that are, you know, date night poker, which is really like a version of strip poker. And we give you all of the information, how to play cards even. I mean, we really try and give you like the full, we want to set you up for success. So all of your little betting cards. And so we pull play into a lot of this because I think people have a lot going on in their minds. They have a lot going on in life, and then they get sucked into everything that's on the phone and they forget to be in the present, be with their partner, and not be thinking about the dishes, the to-do list, but just have some fun playing together. And it's almost like, you go on vacation and you do something new. Maybe you do something as extreme as bungee jumping, or maybe you just take a cooking class. But it's a new experience that then creates a memory for you. And memories are so powerful, and that creates a bond. That's something that you did with your partner that only you two know about, something you shared as an experience together. And that's important. That it's like the building blocks of a solid foundation. And so really, we want couples to come back to that, to say, okay, this is worth the investment. It's worth my time. It's worth my energy. It's so easy. I just pick a box and get it delivered. And then I can have some fun. I can bring some play back into what can feel like a very heavy and stressful world right now.
For sure. Absolutely. And I think something too that also impressed me about the beginning steps, like the instructions, where it was just creating that container for the experience itself. And I think that's something that, I teach a lot of couples as well. Like before you go into a conversation that's important, like turn off the phone, take time to regulate, take time to unwind, and just like get into your body so you can move into that conversation like from your heart space, like from that space that is ready to be present. And I loved how the fantasy box modeled that same kind of design, where it was like, hey, turn your phone off, get a bottle of wine,
Yeah.
and I was like, set in the setting. And I think that container is so special because it really does make it something that's meaningful in a memory. But I think it's just about the undertone of like the relationship is worth this quote work, like the intentions that go into making this something special. That is really, I think, what shows each partner like how much they mean to one another and how much the relationship means. Like you said, it's not just something that they're checking off, but like, hey, we're making this an experience and we want to do it right. I think that's really special.
I love that. No, absolutely. And I think too, one of the things, with that and setting it up is the fantasy box really appeals to sort of how both men and women are hardwired. So, I heard this phrase a while ago, and it was men are like microwaves and women are like crock pots. And, that might be a little generic and generalized. I don't think that's always the case. But I do think that, when you look at it, you are instructed to set a date. So there's some forethought, there's some planning, which definitely stimulates women. And then women take that time to warm up. They're thinking about that date night. They're thinking about how the fantasy box is going to go. What am I going to wear? What perfume do I want to use? How do I want to, get ready for this moment? And all of that is mental stimulation that leads towards preparing for a really special evening. And then, I would say, you've got all of the accessories and the lingerie, and that's going to rev, your male partner up very quickly. And so you've got both of these. And I think it shows forethought and helps him play into and prepare and, devote and dedicate some time into making sure that you're ready for that moment as well. And so it really balances out and tries to make sure that these couples are both parts of the couple are feeling supported and are feeling like they're getting the most out of this experience. It's not leaning to either side of the partnership.
Mm-hmm. That's so important. That's so important. And switching gears a little bit, I wanted to circle back to the concept of taboo and how you've experienced just in your career and what you've noticed, like with taking something like the fantasy box and bringing it into the mainstream. How has that been received? Because I know you said in the brick and mortar hustler store, you got to actually see people's reactions. But I'm curious, like with this online platform, and I know we've engaged virtually as well, but I'm just curious what you've noticed with this day and age with this quote, like taboo, tone. Because as someone who creates adult content myself, like I can empathize where it's sometimes I feel like it's like people love it, but then they're almost like afraid of it in some ways.
Yes.
So I'm just curious, like, what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think there's always kind of going back to that, curiosity piece of it. There's always a lot of curiosity around it. But then there can be a lot of triggers associated with it depending on personal experience. And so, is there shame associated with their own sexuality, with their own expression of intimacy and sex, with their own experiences? So, we always get a lot of interest. I would also say, like, calling from working at Hustler, Penthouse, with some of the other brands, I would always get someone to pick up the phone because there was that curiosity piece. If I was calling a retailer or a brand that I wanted to collab with, they were like, I want to hear your stories and I want to hear a little bit about it, but I don't want to get too close. And so I really have spent a lot of time trying to crack that code. How do you make something that is touchy, taboo, controversial into something for mainstream consumption? And I think a lot of it goes to one, trying to figure out ways to shift perception or have a piece of content and relate it to something that they can understand. Show up in a different environment or space. I always like to say it's like when you see your dentist at the mall and it's like shocking because you're used to seeing your dentist at the dental office and he's got his little lab coat and his gloves, and all of a sudden you see him at the mall and you're like, my dentist buys Lululemon and aloe. I had no idea. And you've got this different perception of him. So how can you, take what you're working on and what you're selling and place it into an environment that's different? One of the examples was when I was working with the cam model company. Typically, the setting was very similar. They were, small bedrooms. And so we wanted to take them out of where you typically saw them represented. And so we turned them into fine art exhibitions and pieces that took them and put them into different spaces. We told no one that they were cam models. We just had them come in and experience the art and then come up with their own ideas. Who do you think this, lovely young woman is? What do you think she represents? And then at the end, when you told them what she, who she was, they were shocked. They were amazed, And so it's that little, just trying to take people out of it. Permission. I think that's a big one too. And something that Hustler did really well, leaning into giving people permission. I think people tend to get very closed off, get very nervous, fear of judgment, fear in general. And so really trying to lead with the permission they need to explore what they're feeling and what they're curious about. And so that's been a lot of the base of what we've done. And then myth busting, I think people have wild thoughts about some adult experiences or what it means if you're speaking about intimacy. And so it's really about trying to debunk those, always, lead with as much information and value and insight, and then give them permission to explore it the way they feel is going to be best for them.
Absolutely. I think that's so potent. And I mean, I'm really hooked on your word permission right now. I'm curious because I feel like there's definitely a big connection between just being comfortable with our own sensuality and allowing that to empower us. I'm curious, like, whether it's through your own experience or what you've noticed in this market, how does one give themselves permission? Like, if you were to speak to our viewers right now, like, what would you advise, like, them to do to give themselves that permission so they can embrace their sensuality and they can move from that empowered space? I'm just curious on your thought.
I love that. And, one of the things that was so great about, I started with Hustler in my very, very early 20s, and it opened my eyes to so many different things. And I always say no one could ever pull the wool over my eyes because I immediately had to check in with myself on how I viewed my own sense of sensuality, how I viewed my own values and beliefs around intimacy. And so I'd say start with yourself first, really get to understand who you are and what you're okay with, and explore all of it. Give yourself permission to just think about it, think about different scenarios, think about what makes you feel comfortable. But knowing yourself, I think, is the number one thing before you start then moving into the next step of exploring intimacy with a partner. Because you want to, when you're in a situation, you want to know your boundaries. You want to understand what you're comfortable with, and you want to communicate those. And I think that's such an important piece that is missed. So that's such a great question. Start with yourself, understand what you're willing to experience and what you feel comfortable with, and then start to build from there. With exploring and expanding your horizons.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Well said. That's so exciting to hear. I know, like, when it comes down to the sensuality piece and exploring ourselves, that has to go hand in hand with self-care. I'm curious, like, what self-care tips you have when people maybe are looking to embark upon that journey of knowing themselves in a sensual way.
That's a great question. Let's see. I always think quiet time with yourself, just kind of thinking about things. I think long baths. I think trying out different things that you're curious about, whether that's a lubricant, a massager, doing those things first with yourself, taking the time just to take care of yourself in general, I think, and feel good. And whatever that looks like for you, and everybody's so different. But I think one of the big things too, especially as women, when you feel good and when you're in a good space in terms of like, ooh, I like what I'm wearing, or I like what my hair looks like, or I love that I just got everything, with my to-do list done, and I was able to drink my electrolytes and do a face mask, and all of a sudden your attitude is great and you're like, I'm open to anything. I think getting in that right headspace by doing the things that, make you feel good, great first step. I mean, it really does matter, I think, especially as you get into longer relationships and life can get in the way and things can happen. Taking the time to prepare yourself, get in the headspace that's going to make you show up as the partner you want to be, and show up as your best self in any of those intimate situations.
Absolutely. I'm so curious, like, with your work now in this field for 20 years, I mean, that's dedication. That is such dedication. I'm curious, like, how has that impacted you personally? Like, have there been certain things that have surprised you that maybe you've learned about yourself?
Oh, another good question. I think human behavior is such a fascinating thing. And it's something that I've sort of seen and tracked, besides just kind of, I would say, adult. I also was the CMO for a cannabis adjacent tech startup. And so cannabis was, again, very one of those things when you're talking about the acceptance of having a glass of wine versus the acceptance of maybe eating a weed gummy, and really seeing the polarity and the divisiveness over something, which technically they're both accomplishing the same thing. They're both kind of taking the edge off, but it's perfectly okay if you're running around with a glass of wine. But God forbid you mention that you might take a weed gummy or smoke a little bit of something. So it's really just watching how people can either evolve and be open to learning, trying, and testing, and be surprised, pleasantly surprised. I think that that's always a fun journey to watch. And it's always a fun journey for me on the side of someone who is typically bringing these brands to market and trying to find that right way to communicate the benefits and the values, and seeing someone have that aha moment. So I think that's really what keeps me in the space. It's, to your point, I've never had a boring job. I've never, I've never
I love it. That's
had
so
a
great.
day, where I was like, okay, let me do the same thing over and over again. It's really, every day is a challenge. It's definitely, there's some challenging moments, but there's always this opportunity to say, okay, if I partnered with a certain brand, or if I, had a moment for, I love long form content. I love podcasts like this because you can really get in deeper into, the motivation behind why we do something like the fantasy box. So that's really what's kept me involved in the space for so long.
Absolutely. That's so exciting. I'm curious, we've talked a lot about just the retrospectives. I'm curious what your thoughts are and maybe what you project looking forward into the future with the Fantasy Box and its mission, and just what you hope to see as well for the future of couples as we move more and more into this digital age, digital world. What is it that you hope to see in couples cultivate, and how relationships maybe transform as we are in this new paradigm?
Yeah. So, We're trying to ensure that we always have a solution for where a couple is at in their particular relationship or in that stage of life. So we have our core boxes, the fantasy boxes, and those are really the full-fledged experience. Those run $149. We then introduced our date night boxes, and they're smaller. We've got Spin the Bottle and 7 Minutes in Heaven. They're $49. So let's say you just want a quick, fun, date night, and $49 feels like a great price point. So we have those. And then we actually just introduced digital downloads. So they're called Friday Night Fantasies, and they're only $19.95. So it's like for a couple that maybe, grandma's taking the kids, I got one night tonight, let's have some fun. Let's do something that's a little bit more than just Netflix and takeout or movie and chill. And so you download it, and they're something you can do at the house. They're really fun. They're cute. They get you talking. They get you playing. And it's, you don't need anything but really just an open mind and a couple of fun props. So, we're trying to keep up where couples are. And we know it's busy. And we know there's a lot to do. And so we want to have a solution across all of that. And then what I hope is, we grow and build this brand. I think there's some opportunities for some pop culture tie-ins. So we know how fun some of these, like The Fourth Wing and these kind of fantasy book talk. So we're coming out with a download that is Bring Your Book Boyfriend to Life. So if you've ever wondered, what it would be like to have your partner as the brooding king or the, lusty lover in that book, we did put together a fun little download that's perfect for summer. So keeping up like that, we never want to be pigeonholed into just a quote unquote fantasy. Fantasies take place in so many different forms. They're different for so many different couples. So really evolving as the opportunities come around to be able to relate to where people are at with their unique desires.
Absolutely. I love how y'all are just so in tune with the atmosphere and just like the frequency of the collective. I think that's so important, and I'm excited because when I was like just exploring all the different options, trying to decide which one we wanted to do, I was like, oh, there's so much to look forward to, because I saw like the bridal one and like just all the other ones, like the anniversary. So I'm like, okay, keep in the pocket.
Exactly. Major milestone. I think, one of the great things, and anniversary is one of our best sellers, definitely at least once a year be able to pull out that special box. And then bridal, we've got 3 gorgeous boxes, all white with gold ribbon. They're perfect. They're already wrapped. You don't even have, if you're going to a wedding, you just bring this. It's so simple. And they give the couple, all the fun things, way more fun than an air fryer.
Yeah, no kidding. That's a great gift idea. I didn't even think about like getting that as a gift. I have so many weddings coming up this year, so that's a good one.
Exactly. Yes.
Perfect. Oh, I love that. Well, that's really exciting. I can't wait to see how just this community continues to expand and all the different things y'all explore. Maybe even like a solo wing. I could see that becoming a thing too. Just with our conversation today, just like that being the first step, perhaps that could be the next line. Who knows?
I love that idea. I think there's so much education that we can pull from this and really help. Maybe you are more at a first step where you're just figuring yourself out and then you're leading into the fantasy. So I love that. So many verticals to explore, so many opportunities. We really want to be a part of the journey all along the way.
Absolutely. And I'm grateful to be a part of the community. And for those of y'all, I know you're curious if you've been listening. And so don't worry, I will be dropping the link to the fantasy box in the description as well. And you can use my code Eclipse50 to receive $50 off your box. Thank me later.
Yes.
But Amanda, thank you so much for being my guest today. I truly just enjoyed our conversation. It was just as juicy as I was hoping it was going to be. Was there anything else, any final thoughts you wanted to share before we wrap up?
No, thank you. You were a beautiful hostess. You brought so much wisdom and insight to it. So I was really happy to share the fantasy box with your audience. I'm really hoping you guys go and try it out and enjoy it.
Thank you. Well, thank you again, Amanda. It was a pleasure. Thank you all for listening. I'm Savannah Rose, and this is Eclipse Evolution. Bye for now.
Bye.